Welcome to day 216 on the trail. We have four readings for today from Mark 14, verse 53 through 15:5, 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 1 through 11:13, 2 Chronicles 7, verse 12 through 9, verse 12, and 4th Maccabees chapter 10, verses 1 through 21. In 1 Kings today, we find a dramatic shift from the height of Solomon's kingdom and wisdom to his slow fade away from God, all within the span of 3 chapters. So how does this slow fade begin? From 1 Kings 11, beginning in verse 1, King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the Israelites, "You shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for they will surely incline your heart to follow their gods." Solomon clung to these in love. Among his wives were 700 princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, God had told his people not to intermarry with the peoples whose land they were about to occupy. The danger was that by uniting with them in marriage, the Israelites would be led to follow the gods of the people whom they married. And, as A. W. Tozer once said, "What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us." Therefore, these marriages and relationships for Solomon began to shift how he saw, trusted, and worshiped God. Not only did Solomon's wives and concubines bring with them different gods and different religious practices, Solomon was also using them for their political value, forming alliances with other nations. Instead of trusting God with Israel's security and prosperity, Solomon begins to rely on political alliances and treaties. Again, this would allow foreign nations and their gods to influence Israel. At first, these alliances may have seemed prudent. What harm could come from establishing a treaty with a neighboring nation? But it was these alliances and marriages that began to draw Solomon away from God. And this leads to tragedy. Beginning in verse 4. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods. And his heart was not true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. For Solomon followed the Astarte, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not completely follow the Lord, as his father David had done. David had a heart for God, and despite some tragic sin against God, the nation, and his family, David continued to repent and return to God. It was David's heart for God that formed his legacy. However, for Solomon, it was a slow fade away from God that led to his destruction, and eventually, the division of the nation. And there's a powerful warning for us here as well. If we ever believe that such a slow fade from God would never happen to us, remember that Solomon himself knew better. According to tradition, Solomon wrote the following. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. Solomon knew he should always be vigilant when it comes to his heart and mind, the decisions he made, and the reason he made them. But knowing and doing are two different things. Vigilance is a moment-to-moment, active commitment. Today, perhaps more than ever, maintaining vigilance over our hearts and mind is increasingly difficult. It is far too easy to allow our minds to slip into neutral as we scroll on our phones. Images float before us. Philosophies drift into our ears. Our minds reel at the flood of information. But these images, words, and thoughts are anything but neutral. They slowly sink into our minds and hearts. And only through active, dedicated vigilance can we keep our hearts and minds focused on the Creator of the universe, who gave His only Son to save us. And that alone should demand our attention and allegiance. In our reading from the Gospel of Mark today, I wanted to focus on Jesus' response to the high priest at his trial. After several false testimonies were presented before the council, the high priest asked Jesus, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" But he was silent and did not answer. Again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" This becomes the central question of Jesus' identity and authority. And it is also the question that the high priest will use to accuse Jesus of blasphemy. Jesus' response to this question will invoke two important passages from the Hebrew Bible and Jewish thought. Verse 62, Jesus said, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power, and coming with the clouds of heaven." The first of these we have discussed previously on a few occasions along the trail. Jesus responds, "I am." In Greek, ego eimi. As we discussed in our exploration of Exodus, I am is a direct statement of God's identity and divine name, Yahweh, which was given to Moses at the burning bush. We saw that throughout the Gospel of John, this phrase, ego eimi, I am, was used repeatedly as part of Jesus' revelation of his divine identity and connection to the Father. Here, Jesus combines the statement, I am, with a second reference when he calls himself the Son of Man, an image which is found in Daniel 7. Now, the most basic meaning of the title Son of Man is simply a human, a person. We will see this used in the book of Ezekiel when the prophet is called Son of Man, simply meaning a human person. However, in the book of Daniel, the Son of Man takes on a much more significant meaning. When we come to the book of Daniel, we will explore the concept of the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, found in Daniel chapter 7 in greater detail. However, for the purpose of our discussion regarding Jesus' response to the question of the high priest, the description of the title Son of Man in Daniel is one who is given an eternal kingdom and authority to rule from God himself. The key passage for our discussion is found in Daniel chapter 7, beginning in verse 13. And he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. To him was given dominion and glory and kingship, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed. Before the Son of Man, all the great empires of the world will be destroyed. Now, in the vision of Daniel 7, these empires are described as great, terrifying beasts. And then, the one who will replace them, the one who is given authority and dominion by God, is pictured as the Son of Man, a human. The comparison and parallelism here is important. As God gave authority to humans to rule over the animals and the beasts on the earth in Genesis, In Daniel, one like a son of man, like a human, is given reign and authority over these beasts, which represent the kingdoms of the earth. The irony of Jesus' trial was that the Son of Man, the Messiah, the one who would bring freedom from the power of their oppressors, was the very one that they've been waiting for. And now, in this moment, he was standing before them, bound and on trial. They were praying that God would set them free, but they did not understand that they had become their own oppressors. Rome was not the true enemy. Instead, it was pride, arrogance, and an unwillingness to see God as moving in their world. The hope that they were looking for was among them, and they did not recognize it. God, the author of life, their life, had come to them and had tried to teach them about true, lasting freedom and hope. And they handed him over to Rome to be crucified. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.